Commander Lisa Grant stood in the observation room of Earth Defense Station Alpha and looked at the screen that showed thousands of red dots moving toward Earth. Each red dot was an enemy warship from the Keltharian Empire. The aliens had conquered hundreds of worlds across the galaxy for 300 years. Now they were coming for humanity. Lisa counted the dots on the screen again and again. 9,700 ships were heading straight for Earth. Her hands felt cold as she realized what this meant. Every person on Earth was in terrible danger. The Keltharians had sent a message 6 months ago. They told humans to surrender or die. Humanity had refused to give up their freedom. Now the price of that choice was coming. Lieutenant Danny Price sat at his control station and read the numbers out loud. His voice shook a little as he spoke. The enemy had more than 2 million soldiers ready to land on Earth. Their weapons could destroy entire cities in minutes. Their technology was better than anything humans had ever built. Lisa listened to Danny's report and felt her stomach twist with fear. She was only 32 years old but felt much older today. The weight of protecting 8 billion people pressed down on her shoulders like a mountain. She had known this day would come ever since humans first met the Keltharians at the colony called New Boston. The aliens had been clear about their intentions. Submit to their rule or be destroyed. There was no third option in their minds. Lisa walked to the window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the largest invasion fleet in galactic history was racing toward her home. She thought about her family down on Earth. Her mother lived in Chicago. Her brother had 2 young children in Seattle. Would they survive what was coming? Lisa pushed those thoughts away. She could not think about personal things right now. She had to focus on the mission. Danny spoke again from his station. He told her that Earth had 47 large warships ready for battle. They also had 112 smaller ships and 300 defense platforms orbiting the planet. The Moon had defensive weapons too. Mars had military bases that could help. It sounded like a strong force when Danny listed everything. But Lisa knew the truth. The humans were outnumbered 20-1. Every military computer had run the calculations. The odds of human survival were less than 2%. But the computers did not know about Project Cerberus. Lisa had kept that secret from almost everyone. Only a few dozen people in the entire solar system knew what humanity had been preparing for the past 6 months. While the Keltharians had been perfecting their weapons of war, humans had been working on something completely different. They had not tried to build bigger guns or stronger shields. Instead, they had changed the rules of warfare itself. Lisa spoke quietly to Danny and asked about the status of the package. That was their code name for Project Cerberus. Danny looked around the command center nervously before answering. He told her that everything was ready. Dr. Kate Morrison had finished the final test 3 hours ago. All systems were working perfectly. The trap was set. Lisa nodded slowly and turned back to the screen. The Keltharians thought they understood humanity. They had watched humans for years before deciding to invade. They saw a species that avoided wars. They saw people who preferred talking instead of fighting. They saw a civilization that built defenses but never attacked other worlds. The aliens had made a simple conclusion from these observations. They decided that humans were weak. They thought humanity's peaceful nature meant they could not fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Humans did not conquer other worlds because they understood how terrible war could be. They built defenses instead of weapons because they valued life. They tried to talk instead of fight because they knew the cost of violence. But when talking failed and when their home was threatened, humans would do whatever was necessary to survive. Danny interrupted her thoughts with another report. The enemy fleet would reach weapons range in 6 hours. Their lead ship was broadcasting the same message over and over again on all frequencies. Surrender now or be destroyed. There would be no mercy for those who resisted. Lisa took a deep breath and told Danny to open a communication channel to the enemy flagship. The screen changed and showed the image of Warlord Thrax. He was the supreme commander of the Keltharian invasion force. Thrax was huge and terrifying to look at. He stood nearly 8 feet tall. His body was covered in natural armor plating that looked like metal. He had 4 arms and each one ended in claws that could cut through steel. His species had evolved as the ultimate predators on their home world. Every part of Thrax's body was designed for hunting and killing. The warlord's voice was deep and filled with contempt when he spoke. He called humans a primitive species. He said their silence over the past few months showed that they were finally becoming wise. He asked if humans were ready to accept the mercy of the Keltharian Empire. Lisa kept her face calm and emotionless as she responded. She told Thrax that humanity had received his terms very clearly: complete surrender of all military forces, acceptance of Keltharian governors to rule over Earth, forced labor quotas that would last for 3 generations. Every human would become a slave to the Empire. Thrax nodded and said these were generous terms. He claimed that many other species had received much worse treatment. Some had been completely wiped out. Some had been used as experiments. Humans should feel lucky that the Empire was willing to let them live as servants. Lisa looked directly into the camera and spoke with absolute certainty. She told the warlord that humanity's answer was still no. They would never surrender. They would never accept slavery. They would fight to the last person if necessary. Thrax made a sound that might have been laughter. He told Lisa that she must have seen his armada on her sensors. Did she really think humans could resist such overwhelming power? Lisa smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. She told Thrax that he had made a critical error in judgment. He had looked at humanity and seen weakness where there was only caution. He had mistaken patience for cowardice. He had assumed that because humans did not build empires, they could not fight wars. She leaned closer to the camera and spoke very clearly. She told him that humans understood the cost of war better than most species. That was exactly why they avoided it. But when war became unavoidable, when their homes and families were threatened, humans did not hold back. Thrax dismissed her words with a wave of one clawed hand. He said that Lisa was speaking bravely for someone about to die. Her entire species would be erased from existence within a single day. Lisa interrupted him and told him something that made him pause. She said that humans had a saying on Earth: the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. But humans also knew that sometimes the hammer breaks before the nail does. Thrax asked which one she thought humanity was in this situation. Lisa's smile grew wider and colder. She told him that time would tell. She said she looked forward to their next conversation if he managed to survive what was coming. Then she cut the transmission before he could respond. The command center fell silent. Everyone had heard the conversation. They had heard their commander essentially declare war on the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. Some looked terrified. Others looked determined. Danny Price stared at Lisa with something like awe in his eyes. Lisa ignored all of them and began giving orders. She told every station to begin final preparations. She ordered the activation of Project Cerberus. It was time to show the Keltharians what humanity was truly capable of. It was time to teach the galaxy that some species should never be underestimated. The red dots on the screen continued moving closer. 9,700 warships carrying death and destruction. But Lisa was not afraid anymore. Humanity had been fighting impossible odds since the dawn of time. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters. They had climbed out of caves and built cities and reached for the stars. They had never been very good at accepting defeat. The Keltharians were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The Keltharian armada crossed into Earth's defensive zone at exactly 14 hours and 23 minutes Universal Standard Time. Warlord Thrax sat on his command throne, aboard the massive dreadnought called Inevitable Conquest. He watched his fleet move into perfect attack formation. Everything was going according to plan. His tactical computers had analyzed the human defenses carefully. The predictions were clear. Total victory would come within 18 hours. The Keltharians would lose less than 1% of their forces. It would be an easy conquest like so many others before it. Thrax felt satisfied as he watched the displays. Soon another species would bow before the Empire. Soon another world would add its resources to Keltharian power. The tactical officer reported that human defensive platforms were charging their weapons. The human fleet was moving to intercept positions. Everything the humans were doing was predictable and useless. Thrax ordered his ships to maintain standard formation. He told his officers to let the humans fire first. He wanted to see what primitive weapons they had before crushing them completely. The first wave of human missiles launched from maximum range. Thousands of them streaked through space toward the Keltharian fleet. They looked impressive on the sensors, but Thrax's point defense systems were the best in the galaxy. Automated weapons tracked and destroyed the missiles easily. A few missiles got through the defensive fire. They exploded against Keltharian shields and did no damage at all. The tactical officer laughed and called the attack pathetic. Thrax was about to agree when something strange happened. The human formation suddenly broke apart. Ships scattered in every direction. They abandoned their defensive positions and ran away like frightened animals. The orbital platforms went dark and stopped transmitting. It looked like complete panic. The tactical officer shouted with excitement. The humans were retreating. They were running for the outer solar system. The battle was already over. But Thrax felt uneasy. Something about this felt wrong. He had conquered 47 worlds in his career. He knew how species acted when they were defeated. This was different. He ordered a full spectrum scan for anything unusual. Before the scan could finish, the first human ship exploded. It was not destroyed by Keltharian weapons. The ship simply detonated on its own. A massive explosion sent debris flying in all directions. Then another ship exploded. And another. And another. The tactical officer demanded to know what was happening. Were the humans destroying their own ships? Why would they do such a crazy thing? Thrax stared at the display screen and suddenly understood. The exploding ships were not random. They were positioned in a very specific pattern. They formed a perfect sphere around the Keltharian fleet. Thrax's threat sacks inflated with sudden fear. He roared orders to all ships. Evasive action. Emergency retreat. But it was already too late. The network-activated Dr. Kate Morrison had called it a spatial disruptor field. Each destroyed human ship had carried experimental technology. The devices created localized distortions in the fabric of space-time itself. One device alone was barely functional, but when dozens of them activated together in the right pattern, they created something unprecedented. Reality itself began to twist and bend around the Keltharian armada. Thrax watched in absolute horror as space folded in on itself. Ships that had been kilometers apart suddenly collided with crushing force. Vessels moving at full speed instantly became motionless as momentum ceased to exist. Physics stopped working the way it should. The shields that protected Keltharian ships were designed to stop energy weapons and physical impacts. They offered no protection at all against the laws of physics being rewritten. The Armada had entered the disruption field spread out over millions of cubic kilometers of space. The field compressed all of that space down to less than 1,000 kilometers across. 9,700 ships tried to occupy roughly the same location at the same time. The results were catastrophic beyond description. Ships crushed against each other like tin cans being squeezed by giant hands. Fusion reactors lost containment and exploded in chain reactions. Ammunition storage areas detonated from the pressure. It became impossible to tell where one ship ended and another began. Metal screamed and twisted. Hulls split open. Crews died instantly as their ships were compressed into mangled wreckage. The heart of the Keltharian armada simply ceased to exist as anything recognizable. Lisa Grant watched from Earth Defense Station Alpha as the sensor displays showed what was happening. The greatest invasion fleet in galactic history was destroying itself. She felt no joy at the sight, only a grim satisfaction that the plan had worked. She also felt deep sadness for the thousands of human volunteers who had given their lives to make this possible. Every ship that had exploded to create the disruption field had been crewed by people who knew they would not survive. They had volunteered anyway. They had flown to their positions and activated the devices and died so that Earth could live. Lisa would never forget their sacrifice. She would carry the weight of ordering those deaths for the rest of her life. Danny Price spoke in a shaking voice as he read the damage reports. Approximately 8,500 enemy ships had been destroyed or disabled in the initial compression. Another 1,000 ships were damaged but might still be functional. Lisa asked about survivors. Danny consulted his displays with a pale face. About 200 Keltharian ships had escaped the field effect. They were retreating at maximum speed. They were running away from Earth as fast as their engines could push them. Lisa nodded slowly. In less than 3 minutes, humanity had reduced the largest military force in known space to scattered debris and terrified survivors. But the cost had been terrible. Every human ship sacrificed to create the field was gone. Thousands of brave men and women who had volunteered for what they knew was a suicide mission. Lisa asked about the status of remaining human forces. Danny reported that they had suffered minimal damage. The field effect had been precisely calibrated to avoid human positions. 31 capital ships remained operational. 73 frigates were ready for combat. 240 defense platforms were still functional. Lisa smiled grimly. It was more than enough to deal with the fleeing survivors. She ordered pursuit teams to launch immediately. She wanted every surviving Keltharian ship tracked and monitored. Then she told Danny to open a communication channel to the enemy flagship. It took several minutes to locate the inevitable conquest among all the wreckage. The mighty dreadnought had survived, but only barely. Half of its hull was crushed and twisted. Its shields were completely down. It was venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. The ship was dying slowly. When Thrax's image appeared on the display screen, he looked nothing like the proud warlord from before. His armor was cracked in several places. One of his forearms hung useless at his side. His eyes showed an emotion that Keltharians rarely experienced. Pure, undiluted fear. Lisa spoke calmly to the warlord. She said they had been having a conversation about strength and weakness. Perhaps they should continue that discussion. Thrax's voice was rough and broken. He said that humans had used their own ships as weapons. They had sacrificed their own people. What kind of insane species would do such a thing? Lisa's expression remained cold and hard. She told him that humans were the kind of species that understood the true cost of freedom. Every person on those sacrificial ships had been a volunteer. They knew they would not come back. They did it anyway because that was what humans did. They sacrificed for each other. They died for each other. When everything they loved was threatened, they would burn their own fleet to ashes if it meant stopping the enemy. Thrax said nothing. His alien features were difficult to read, but Lisa could sense his shock. She continued speaking. She gave the warlord new terms. He would order all surviving ships to withdraw from the solar system immediately. He would return to the Keltharian Empire and inform them that Earth was permanently off limits. If humanity ever saw another Keltharian warship near their space, they would consider it an act of war. And the next time, humans would not be satisfied with just destroying a fleet. They would follow the Keltharians home. Thrax tried to protest. He started to say that the Empire would never accept such terms. Lisa interrupted him coldly. She told him that the Empire would do exactly what she commanded. Thrax would explain to them what happened here today. He would tell them that humans do not bluff or make empty threats. When humans say they will do something, they do it. If the Empire leaders doubted his story, he should remind them of a simple fact. He had arrived at Earth with 9,700 warships. Lisa asked him how many ships he was leaving with. The tactical officer answered in a broken voice. 17 ships remained combat capable enough to make the jump to hyperspace. Only 17 out of nearly 10,000. Lisa repeated the number slowly. 17. She suggested that Thrax make those 17 ships count. He should take them home and tell the Empire what happened. Because if there was ever a next time, there would not be any survivors at all to carry the message. The transmission ended. Lisa turned away from the display, feeling suddenly exhausted. They had won. Against impossible odds, humanity had won. But as she looked at the casualties, 3 days after the battle, the debris field from the destroyed Keltharian armada still filled Earth's orbital space. Recovery crews worked constantly to catalog the wreckage and search for survivors. They tried to prevent the larger pieces from becoming dangerous to navigation. Captain Ryan Cooper piloted his salvage ship carefully through the twisted remains of what had been a Keltharian heavy cruiser. His crew had found 17 alien bodies so far. All of them were dead from explosive decompression when their ships broke apart. No survivors had been found anywhere in the debris field. Ryan doubted they would find any. The destruction had been too complete and too sudden. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Amy Blake, spoke quietly as they navigated through the wreckage. She said that all of this felt wrong. Ryan glanced at her and reminded her that humans had won the battle. The Keltharians would have killed everyone on Earth if given the chance. Amy nodded, but her expression remained troubled. She understood that they had to fight. But she asked Ryan to look at what surrounded them. Thousands of ships destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people killed. Yes, they had been invaders. Yes, they would have shown no mercy to humanity, but they had still been living beings with families and lives and futures. Humanity had erased all of them in just 3 minutes. The scale of death was almost impossible to comprehend. Ryan was silent for a moment as he considered her words. She was not wrong about the terrible cost. It would take years to properly recover all the bodies and identify them. They would send whatever could be recovered back to Keltharian space. Even enemies deserve proper burial, but Ryan also understood why the battle had been fought this way. He told Amy that this was exactly why humans did not fight wars unless absolutely necessary. When they did fight, the results were catastrophic. Humans could not afford to do war halfway. They had to win completely or risk losing everything. Amy did not respond, but Ryan could see she was still struggling with what they had done. He understood her feelings. He felt the same conflict in his own heart. Back on Earth, the reaction to the victory was complicated. People celebrated in the streets because humanity had survived. They had proven they could defend themselves against overwhelming odds. But the cost was becoming clearer every day. Admiral Kevin Barnes stood before the United Earth Council to answer questions. The council chamber was packed with representatives from every nation. They all demanded answers and justifications and explanations. Council President Michelle Warren began the questioning. She asked about the death toll. 2,347 human crew members had died on the sacrificial ships. Their families wanted to know why their loved ones had to die. Why could humanity not negotiate with the Keltharians? Why did the response have to be so overwhelming and violent? Barnes met the council president's gaze steadily. He explained that anything less than overwhelming force would have been seen as weakness by the Keltharians. They were a species that only respected strength. If humans had fought conventionally, they would have lost the battle. If they had tried to negotiate, they would have been enslaved. Project Cerberus had been the only option that gave humanity a real chance of survival. Another council member asked about Keltharian casualties. Preliminary estimates suggested over 200,000 aliens had died. That made humanity responsible for one of the largest mass killings in recorded galactic history. How could they justify such actions? Barnes replied firmly that it made humans survivors. Those Keltharians had come to Earth to conquer or exterminate every human being. Every single one of them knew what they were participating in. They were not innocent civilians. They were soldiers in an invasion force. Yes, humanity had killed them, but they did it to protect 8 billion human lives on Earth alone, not counting the colonies. Barnes said he would not apologize for choosing to save humanity. The debate continued for hours. Some council members argued that humans had crossed a moral line. They claimed humanity had become the very monsters they opposed. Others insisted that survival was more important than abstract morality. The Keltharians had brought destruction upon themselves by threatening Earth. Beyond Earth's political chambers, a different conversation was taking place across the entire galaxy. News of the battle spread through civilized worlds like wildfire. The Keltharian Empire had seemed unstoppable for 3 centuries. Now they had suffered their worst defeat ever. An armada that should have easily crushed humanity had been reduced to 17 fleeing survivors. Species that had been subjugated by the Keltharians began whispering among themselves. Maybe resistance was possible after all. Species that had been considering surrender suddenly reconsidered their options, and species that had never encountered either humans or Keltharians began paying very close attention to events near Earth. On the colony world called Talaxis III, a young Valorian engineer named Kex studied fragmented reports about the battle with intense interest. The Valorians had been conquered by Keltharians 60 years ago. Their military had been dismantled. Their culture was suppressed. Their people lived under constant occupation. But if humans could resist successfully, then maybe others could too. If a single species could defeat the Empire's might, then perhaps the Empire was not truly invincible. Kex began composing a message. It would take weeks to reach Earth through secret channels, but the message was very simple. Just 2 words. Teach us Lisa Grant dealt with her own personal aftermath at Earth Defense Station Alpha. She had become an instant hero to some people. Others called her a war criminal. Her face appeared on every news feed throughout human space. Politicians wanted her testimony at hearings. Military analysts wanted to study her tactics and strategies. Families of the dead wanted answers about why their loved ones had to die. But more than anything else, Lisa just wanted to sleep. She had not rested properly in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the sacrificial ships exploding. She heard the voices of the volunteers who had flown those ships. She felt the weight of the order she had given. Danny Price interrupted her thoughts. He told her there was something important she needed to see. Lisa followed him to the communications center where a priority message was waiting. The message bore the official seal of the Keltharian Empire. Lisa opened it with some anxiety. The message was brief and came from someone who called himself High Counselor Vraxis. The message stated that the Keltharian Empire acknowledged the independence and territorial sovereignty of the human coalition. All claims to human worlds were hereby withdrawn. Furthermore, the Empire proposed a non-aggression pact and mutual defense treaty. The message ended with a simple statement. The Empire had underestimated humanity. They would not make that mistake again. Lisa read the message 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Only 17 ships had survived out of nearly 10,000. That had been enough to completely change the Keltharian Empire's position on humanity. Actually, it was more than just the destroyed ships. It was the absolute determination humans had shown, the willingness to sacrifice everything, the demonstrated capability to make good on every threat. The Keltharians had learned that humans meant what they said. Danny asked what response they should send. Lisa thought carefully about her answer. She thought about the 2,347 crew members who had given their lives. She thought about the hundreds of thousands of Keltharians who died in the trap. She thought about all the alien species across the galaxy, watching to see what humanity would do next. Lisa told Danny to send a response accepting the Empire's recognition of human independence. But humanity would need to discuss the treaty terms carefully. The message should make clear that humans did not seek conflict with anyone. However, they would never hesitate to defend themselves or their allies with maximum force if necessary. The Keltharians needed to understand that the battle at Earth was not luck or desperation. It was a deliberate choice, and humanity would make that same choice again if forced to. Danny moved to draft the response message. Lisa returned to her observation window. The debris field glittered in reflected sunlight. It was both a graveyard and a monument, a reminder of terrible sacrifice and human determination. Humanity had announced its presence on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. The question now was what they would do with that presence. Would they become conquerors themselves? Would they use their demonstrated military capability to build an empire, or would they stay true to the principles that had defined them? Lisa hoped humanity would choose wisely. The galaxy was watching. Millions of beings across hundreds of worlds waited to see what kind of species humanity truly was. Were they defenders or aggressors? Protectors or conquerors? The answer to that question would shape galactic politics for generations to come. Lisa looked out at the stars and made a silent promise. Humanity would not become what they had just defeated. They would find a better way forward. 6 months after the battle, the galaxy was still trying to understand its new reality. The Keltharian Empire had pulled back its expansion for the first time in its long history. The 17 ships that survived became known among Keltharians as the Fleet of Wisdom. They served as a permanent reminder of what happened when the Empire underestimated its enemies. But the consequences of Earth's victory reached far beyond simple military matters. The battle had changed how every species in the galaxy thought about power and resistance. New possibilities existed now that had seemed impossible before. Dr. Kate Morrison sat in a secure conference room deep beneath the Swiss Alps. She was surrounded by representatives from 7 different alien species. Each one had made a dangerous journey to Earth in secret. If the Keltharians discovered their trips, there would be serious consequences. But the aliens had come anyway because they needed hope. They needed to learn how humanity had achieved the impossible. Kate explained for the 3rd time that the spatial disruptor technology could not be shared. She was not trying to keep secrets. The technology was simply too dangerous and unstable. The version humans used had a 30% chance of catastrophic failure during deployment. Humanity had been lucky. Others might not be so fortunate. A Valorian delegate leaned forward with intense interest. It was Kex, the same engineer who had sent the first message to Earth asking for help. Kex said that if the technology could not be shared, then perhaps humans could teach their principles of warfare instead. The Keltharians had controlled every battlefield through superior force for centuries. Humanity defeated them through innovation and willingness to sacrifice. Those were lessons that any species could learn. Kate exchanged glances with Admiral Kevin Barnes, who had joined the meeting as military liaison. Barnes nodded slowly. He told the assembled aliens that humans could teach them, but they needed to understand what they were really asking for. Human warfare was not just about weapons or clever tactics. It was about being willing to pay prices that others would not pay. Humanity had lost over 2,000 volunteers in the battle. Those people had flown into certain death willingly. Could other species make that same choice? Could they ask their people to sacrifice everything for victory? Kex's expression became hard and determined. The engineer explained that Keltharians had killed 300,000 Valorians when they first invaded. The Empire took 10,000 more every year as forced labor. Yes, the Valorians could make difficult choices. They already had. The price of occupation was paid every single day. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed those words. Each alien delegate wore similar expressions of grim determination. These were not peaceful philosophers looking for easy answers. They were survivors of Keltharian brutality. They were representatives of species that had already suffered terrible losses. Barnes studied their faces carefully. Then he made a decision. He told them that humanity would help. But they would do this properly. Humans would not simply give weapons to desperate people and send them off to die. They would teach these species to fight the way humans fought. Intelligently, ruthlessly, and effectively. They would share knowledge about strategy and tactics and logistics. They would help build real resistance movements that had genuine chances of success. That meeting began what would later be called the Human Military Exchange Program. It started small with just a few dozen alien officers training at human military academies. But within 1 year, thousands of students from dozens of species were learning from human instructors. The program expanded rapidly as word spread. Species that had given up hope began to believe again. Species that had accepted occupation as permanent started planning resistance. The Keltharians watched these developments with growing alarm. High Counselor Vraxis found himself in an increasingly difficult political position within the Empire. Warlord Thrax attended a council session and spoke angrily about human actions. He had survived his injuries from the battle, but wore his scars as constant reminders. He insisted that humans were arming Keltharian subjects. Humanity claimed to want peace but prepared the entire galaxy for war. Vraxis corrected the warlord carefully. Humans were not preparing for war. They were preparing species for resistance. There was an important difference, and perhaps that was not entirely unwelcome. The council chamber erupted in outrage at his words. Thrax slammed his claws against his bench. Was Vraxis suggesting that the Empire should accept limits on expansion? Should they allow their subjects to resist occupation? Vraxis replied calmly that they should remember why the Empire expanded in the first place. Keltharians conquered because they believed it made them stronger. But strength gained through fear was brittle and temporary. Humans had proven that point dramatically. One united species had defeated a force 20 times larger. Meanwhile, the Keltharian Empire sprawled across hundreds of systems held together only by threat of force. How many of those systems would rebel immediately if they thought they could win? Another counselor admitted quietly that all of them would rebel given the chance. That was exactly why the Empire had to maintain overwhelming strength. Vraxis suggested trying something radical instead. The Empire could earn loyalty rather than demanding it. They could offer partnership instead of subjugation. Humans had demonstrated that genuine cooperation between species produced remarkable results. Perhaps Keltharians should learn from that example. The debate that followed would reshape Keltharian policy for generations. Some council members clung desperately to the old ways of conquest. Others began seeing that the galaxy was changing whether they liked it or not. Humanity had made sure of that. Back on Earth, Lisa Grant walked through memorial gardens dedicated to the crew members lost in battle. Each volunteer had a tree planted in their memory. The forest of remembrance grew larger every month as more trees matured. Lisa stopped at one tree in particular, an oak sapling marked with a simple plaque that read Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, Engineer Corps Project Cerberus. Jake had been her close friend since their academy days together. He was one of the first volunteers for the sacrificial ships. He personally oversaw installation of spatial disruptors on 17 vessels. Lisa remembered his last message to her sent just hours before the battle began. Jake had written that she should not feel guilty about the orders she gave. Every volunteer made their choice with clear eyes and full understanding. If humanity was remembered for anything, it should be for protecting each other always. A young cadet approached Lisa hesitantly. He introduced himself as Danny Cole. Lieutenant Sullivan had been his uncle. Lisa turned to look at him and immediately saw Jake's features reflected in the young man's face. She told Danny that his uncle had been a remarkable officer and an even better friend. Danny explained quietly that he joined the academy because of Jake, because of all the volunteers who had given everything. They showed the galaxy what humanity could accomplish. Danny wanted to make sure their sacrifice continued to mean something important. Lisa assured him that the sacrifice absolutely meant something. It would continue meaning something as long as people remembered why those volunteers made their choice. They did not die for glory or conquest or power. They died to protect everything and everyone they loved. That was what made their sacrifice meaningful. As the young cadet left, Lisa remained in the garden surrounded by growing trees. Each tree represented a life given freely. Each one was a promise kept. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy through willingness to sacrifice everything for survival. It was a harsh introduction to galactic politics, but it was completely honest. Across the stars, other species were learning important lessons about humanity. The lesson was not that humans should be feared, though many did fear them now. The real lesson was about what it meant to be human, to never surrender even when defeat seemed certain, to never stop fighting even when the odds were impossible, to never leave anyone behind no matter what the cost. Those principles resonated with oppressed species throughout the galaxy. They gave hope to people who had forgotten what hope felt like. They inspired resistance in places where resistance had seemed futile. Lisa stood in the memorial garden as the sun set over Earth. Long shadows stretched between the trees. She thought about everything that had changed in just 6 months. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity would never be the same. The question now was whether they would use their new influence wisely. Would they become the protectors they claimed to be, or would power corrupt them like it corrupted so many others? Lisa hoped desperately that humanity would choose the right path, because the galaxy was watching every move they made. Millions of beings across hundreds of worlds were deciding whether to trust humanity or fear them. That decision would shape the future of galactic civilization for centuries to come. 20 years after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy looked completely different from before. The Keltharian Empire still existed but had transformed into something new. Some worlds remained under direct Keltharian control, but many others had negotiated new arrangements. They gained autonomy in exchange for military alliance. They received self-governance in exchange for mutual defense agreements. The Empire had become a federation in everything but name. The change had not been easy or peaceful, but it had been inevitable once humanity proved that resistance was possible. Admiral Lisa Grant now held the rank of Fleet Commander of the United Earth Forces. She stood on the bridge of humanity's newest capital ship called the UES Determination. Lisa was 52 years old now. Her hair showed silver streaks. Her face carried lines that marked decades of difficult decisions. But her eyes remained as sharp and determined as ever. She watched a diplomatic convoy approaching through space. It was an unprecedented gathering of different species, representatives from humanity, the Keltharian Federation, the Valorian Alliance, and a dozen other species that had once been enemies or strangers. Her executive officer, Captain Danny Cole, stood beside her. Jake Sullivan's nephew had grown into an excellent officer. He carried forward his uncle's legacy of innovation and sacrifice. Danny commented that it was quite a sight to see so many different species working together. Lisa agreed. 20 years ago, half these species would not even speak to each other. Now they were negotiating a mutual defense pact that would bind them together. Danny observed that the galaxy was finally learning what humanity already knew. Cooperation was always stronger than conquest. Peace was more powerful than war. The conference that followed lasted 3 full days. Lisa participated as humanity's military representative, but she found herself observing more than negotiating. The real work was being done by politicians and diplomats. These were people who understood the delicate art of building lasting peace between former enemies. Lisa was a warrior. She understood conflict and battle and sacrifice, but peace required different skills. She was content to let others handle those negotiations. On the final day, she found herself in a private meeting with High Counselor Vraxis. The Keltharian leader had aged considerably since their first encounter during the war. Vraxis's once vibrant armor plating had faded to dull colors. His movements were slower and more careful. but his eyes remained sharp and intelligent. He told Lisa that he wanted to speak with her before the treaty signing ceremony. He wanted to thank her personally. Lisa raised an eyebrow in surprise. She asked if he was thanking her for destroying his armada and killing hundreds of thousands of his people. Vraxis replied seriously that he was thanking her for teaching the Keltharian Empire humility. The Empire had believed itself invincible for so long. That belief made them arrogant and cruel and short-sighted. Humanity shattered that belief in just 3 minutes. The defeat forced Keltharians to examine themselves honestly. They had to face what they had become. Many Keltharians still hated humanity for that painful lesson, but Vraxis believed that humans had actually saved his species from a terrible fate. Lisa asked how killing hundreds of thousands could possibly save anyone. Vraxis explained quietly that humanity saved Keltharians from becoming complete monsters. The Empire was on that path toward pure evil. Another century of conquest and they would have been nothing more than tyrants ruling a galaxy full of hatred and fear. Humanity showed them a different way forward. Not through philosophy or gentle diplomacy, but through the only language Keltharians understood at that time: overwhelming force and absolute will to use it. Lisa was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke carefully. She told Vraxis that humanity had killed his people. She personally ordered those deaths. She could justify the orders and explain why they were necessary, but she could never forget what she did. Neither should he. Vraxis assured her that he never forgot. Every Keltharian leader now had to visit the Memorial of 17 before taking office. They stood before the monument and read every single name of every soldier who died that day. All 207,341 names. The reading took 6 hours. They did this so no Keltharian leader would ever forget the cost of arrogance and underestimating enemies. Lisa asked if Keltharian people accepted this practice. Vraxis said that most did accept it now. Some still called for revenge against humanity, but those voices grew fewer each year. The galaxy had changed too much. Humanity changed it through that one devastating battle, but also through everything that came after. The way humans helped rebuild damaged worlds, the way they shared knowledge freely with other species, the way they treated former enemies as potential friends. Humanity could have exploited their victory to build a new empire. They chose not to. That choice meant more than the battle itself. Lisa explained that humanity learned their own lessons long ago on Earth before reaching the stars. Empire building always led to ruin eventually. Conquest created nothing that lasted. The only real strength came from what people built together through cooperation. The treaty signing ceremony was held aboard the UES Determination as neutral ground. Representatives from 47 different species added their signatures to the document. The Galactic Defense Coalition was born. It was not a government or an empire. It was a mutual agreement between free peoples. Any attack on one member would be considered an attack on all members. Humanity had gone from defending themselves against extinction to becoming the cornerstone of galactic security in just 20 years. After the ceremony ended, Lisa took a shuttle down to Earth. She went to the memorial gardens that had grown considerably over 2 decades. New trees had been planted for every human lost in various conflicts and accidents during humanity's expansion into the broader galaxy. But the original grove remained the heart of everything. Those 2,347 trees from the Battle of Earth stood as the foundation. Lisa walked to Jake Sullivan's oak tree. It had grown tall and strong over the years. The plaque at its base now carried an additional inscription added 5 years after the battle. The inscription read, "They came here to conquer. We showed them the cost. They left 17 ships to carry the message home." That message was simple. Humanity does not yield, not to threats, not to fear, not to impossible odds. We endure, we adapt, we overcome, and we never forget those who made it possible. Lisa placed her hand on the oak's rough bark. She felt the life pulsing through the tree. 20 years of growth reaching toward the sky, a living monument to sacrifice and determination and hope. She spoke quietly to her old friend. She told Jake that they had done it. Not just survived, but built something genuinely better. Something worth protecting and worth believing in. Her communicator chimed with an incoming call. Danny Cole's voice came through. He reported that they were receiving first contact signals from a new species on the outer rim. The aliens were asking specifically for human diplomatic representatives. Apparently, they had heard stories about humanity. They wanted to establish peaceful relations before any misunderstandings could occur. Lisa smiled at the news. She told Danny to send the full greeting package, including historical records of the Battle of Earth. Let these new aliens see what humanity was capable of doing when threatened. But more importantly, let them see that humans only used that capability when they had absolutely no other choice. Danny acknowledged the orders. Then he mentioned that the new species was asking about human defensive systems. The story of defeating the Keltharian armada had become legendary across the galaxy. They wanted to know if it was really true that humans sacrificed their own ships and crews. Lisa told him to confirm that every word of the story was true. Those people did not sacrifice themselves for glory or conquest or power. They did it to protect their home and everyone they loved. That was what made humanity different from empire builders. Humans did not fight to gain power over others. They fought to protect each other. As she ended the call, Lisa looked up through the oak's branches at the evening stars appearing in Earth's sky. Somewhere out there, 17 Keltharian ships had limped home 2 decades ago with humanity's message. That message had changed everything, but the real story was never about weapons or tactics or crushing military victory. The real story was about people standing together against impossible odds, about the strength found in genuine unity, about the power of sacrifice made freely for love of home and love of each other. That was humanity's true legacy to the galaxy, not the destruction they could cause, but what they chose to build afterward, the help they offered to former enemies, the knowledge they shared without demanding payment, the determination to create something better than empires built on fear. They had sent 9,700 ships to conquer Earth. Only 17 returned home. But those 17 carried a message that echoed across the galaxy for generations. Humanity could not be conquered by force, but they could be reasoned with. They could be befriended. They could be trusted as allies. Just never threaten what they love. Because when pushed to the absolute brink, humans would rather burn the entire galaxy than surrender, and they had the determination, the ingenuity, and the sheer stubborn will to make